My son slammed his fist on the dining table so hard the plates rattled. "This house belongs to me and my wife," he shouted, his face red with rage. I stood there, frozen, the same walls that once heard lullabies now echoing his cruelty. He wasn't asking for my opinion. He was claiming my life's only sanctuary as his property. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. My own child saw me as an obstacle, not a mother. And that's when I decided the house would go, but not to him. If you've ever been through something like this, hit that like button or leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Now, let me tell you how it all started. My son slammed his fist on the dining table so hard the plates rattled. "This house belongs to me and my wife," he shouted, his face red with rage. I stood there frozen, the same walls that once heard lullabies now echoing his cruelty. He wasn't asking for my opinion. He was claiming my life's only sanctuary as his property. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. My own child saw me as an obstacle, not a mother. And that's when I decided the house would go, but not to him. If you've ever been through something like this, hit that like button or leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Now, let me tell you how it all started. It began on a quiet Sunday morning. The sun had just broken through the curtains, painting the living room walls with soft golden light. I was standing by the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into the same mug I'd used for 15 years, the one my late husband bought at a roadside diner during our anniversary trip to Oregon. My world was small, quiet, predictable, and safe. Until Lucas and Mia showed up unannounced, their smiles tight, their eyes restless. "Mom," Lucas said, walking in without knocking, like always. "We need to talk." He didn't sit down, neither did Mia. She leaned against the doorway, scrolling through her phone like being here was a chore. I noticed she'd started calling me Helen instead of Mum. It sounded like a demotion. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "You both look upset." Lucas glanced around the living room. His tone was clipped, impatient. "We heard from a neighbour that you met with a realtor last week. Is that true?" I froze for a second. "I just asked about prices," I said. "The house is getting old. I thought maybe—" He cut me off with a sharp laugh, the kind that didn't sound like my son's. "Maybe? You thought maybe you'd sell the house without talking to us?" "Lucas," I began, but he was already pacing. "Dad built this place for us. It's not just yours. It's family property. You can't make decisions like that on your own." His words hit harder than I expected. Family property. My husband and I bought this house together 35 years ago. We worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and scraped by to make those payments. He didn't build it for us. He built it for me, for our life. But I didn't say that. I just stood there, clutching my mug like it could anchor me. Mia finally spoke, her voice soft but sharp, like silk hiding a blade. "We've been talking, Helen. The place is way too big for you now. It's 2 stories, lots of stairs. It's not safe. We're worried about you." Worried. That word always sounds sweet when it's poisoned. She took a step closer. "Lucas and I were thinking, if you sold this place, you could move into a smaller condo, something more comfortable, and we could finally start our family here. You know, continue the legacy." "Continue the legacy," I repeated, staring at her. "By taking my home?" She smiled, unbothered. "Not taking, sharing." Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, Mom, you're almost 70. You shouldn't be living alone in a big house like this. We'd take care of everything, the paperwork, the moving. You'd thank us later." The way he said take care of everything made my stomach twist. There was a tone underneath it. Entitlement, control, something ugly that had been hiding in plain sight. "Lucas," I said softly, "this house is all I have left of your father." He slammed his hand on the table again. "And that's why it should stay in the family, not end up with strangers or some greedy realtor. Mia and I have plans for this place. We've talked about remodeling, making it modern, building a nursery upstairs." I blinked. "A nursery?" Mia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. "Yes, We've been planning this for months. We thought you'd be happy to see this house filled with life again." Something in me broke quietly. They weren't telling me their plans, they were announcing them. Decisions made, futures drawn, and my name nowhere on the page. "I see," I said finally. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You already decided what happens to my house? You just forgot to ask the person who owns it." Lucas frowned. "Mom, don't make this difficult. You know we're right." I set my mug down carefully. The sound of ceramic against wood was the only thing between us. "What I know," I said slowly, "is that you stopped visiting me unless you needed something. You stopped calling unless it was convenient. And now, the only reason you're here is because this roof still has value." For the first time, silence filled the room. Even Mia stopped pretending to check her phone. Lucas tried again, softer this time. "Mom, please, we're family. You can't think like that." "Can't I?" I whispered. "Because that's exactly how you're treating me." The clock on the wall ticked so loud it felt like it was counting down to something irreversible. Finally, I picked up my mug again. The coffee was cold, my hands weren't. "You're right about one thing," I said. "This house is too big for me now." Lucas's eyes lit up. "So you'll sell it?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "I will." He exhaled in relief. "Good. We can start looking at places this week. I know it, but not to you." He froze. The smile vanished. "What did you just say?" I turned away, looking out the window at the garden I'd tended for decades. "I'll sell it, Lucas, but I'll decide who it goes to, and when." Mia's voice rose behind him, shrill, indignant. "That's not fair. We've been counting on this." I faced them again, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. "That's the problem, dear. You've been counting on me instead of yourselves." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard a frame fell from the wall. The picture inside was of my husband holding Lucas as a boy, both smiling, both innocent. The glass cracked clean across their faces. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at that broken photo. I realized something no mother ever wants to admit. Love doesn't always come back, even when you give it everything. And once I understood that, the rest became simple. That was the night I decided to sell. The morning after that argument, the house felt different. It was still filled with the same furniture, the same photographs, the same faint scent of lavender that lingered on the curtains. But the air had changed. Every sound seemed sharper, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old floorboards. I realized those noises were the only company I had left. Lucas didn't call that day. He didn't call the next either. For a while, I convinced myself he was just cooling off, that he'd show up with an apology and a sheepish smile. But a week passed, then two, and silence became its own kind of visitor. I filled my days with small routines: water the plants, sweep the porch, brew coffee in the old percolator that sputtered like it was dying but never actually did, much like me, I thought. Sometimes I'd bake a pie and set out an extra fork out of habit, pretending someone might drop by. No one did. When Lucas finally appeared, it wasn't to apologize. He showed up on a Sunday afternoon with Mia trailing behind him, her phone already in hand. He kissed my cheek quickly, more of a formality than affection, and said, "We're just checking in." He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I tried to talk about anything else, the weather, the new neighbor, the book I was reading, but every topic circled back to the same question. "So, Mum, have you thought more about selling?" I lied and said I hadn't made up my mind. His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't wait too long. The market's unpredictable." Mia added, "And honestly, Helen, this place needs a lot of work. If you sell now, you'll get more. We're only trying to help." I smiled, the kind of smile that hides a wound. "I know, dear." When they left, the house was quiet again, too quiet. I sat at the table where they'd just been, still warm from their presence, and whispered to the empty chair across from me, "Thomas, what happened to our boy?" My husband had been gone 6 years. but I still talked to him like he might answer. He was the one who taught Lucas how to fish, how to drive, how to stand tall when the world pushed him down. Thomas believed kindness could fix anything. I used to believe that too. But kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. I just didn't know that yet. Weeks drifted by. Lucas's visits grew shorter, his tone sharper. He started calling only when he needed something: money for a car repair, a co-sign on a loan, help with property taxes, just for now. Each time I said yes, he promised it was the last. Each time, it wasn't. Mia's attitude changed too. The sweetness that once felt genuine now tasted rehearsed. She began inspecting the house when she came over, running her fingers along the walls, asking, "How much do you think this space could go for if we renovated?" The first time she said "we," I flinched. One afternoon, she brought over a catalogue of furniture. "When this becomes our home, I'm thinking of painting the kitchen white. It'll brighten the place." I said nothing. She mistook my silence for agreement. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at that catalogue she'd forgotten. Every glossy page showed a future I didn't exist in, rooms filled with their laughter, their dreams, their lives. Mine had been erased like chalk from a board. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Lucas's words in my mind. "This house belongs to me and my wife." The way he said it, it wasn't anger anymore. It was conviction. The next day I started cleaning drawers, not because they were messy, but because I needed to feel like something in this house still obeyed me. I found old receipts, birthday cards, a faded grocery list in Thomas's handwriting. In the back of the drawer was an envelope with my name on it. His handwriting again, uneven but unmistakable. Inside was a short note, written the year before he passed. "If life ever gets too loud, remember that peace is something you're allowed to choose." I read that line again and again until the paper trembled in my hands. Peace. When had I stopped believing I deserved that? Days later, Lucas came by unannounced. He was in a hurry, wearing his office suit, eyes tired. "Mom, can you sign these?" He slid a few papers across the table. "What are they?" I asked. "Just some preliminary documents, financial stuff. It'll make things easier when the time comes." "When what time comes?" He sighed, frustrated. "Come on, Mom. We're just trying to plan ahead. It's not like you're going to live here forever." I looked down at the papers. They weren't financial stuff. They were early transfer documents. If I signed, the deed would be in his name. I pushed them back toward him. "No." "Mom, don't make this complicated," he said, his voice rising. "It's just a formality." "No," I repeated, firmer. He gathered the papers roughly, muttering something under his breath I couldn't quite catch. But I didn't need to. I'd heard enough. When the door closed behind him, I locked it, something I'd never done before. The sound of the latch sliding into place was quiet but powerful. It felt like closing a chapter. That evening, I made tea and sat by the window. The sun was setting behind the old oak tree, and the light turned everything gold. For a moment, the house looked exactly as it had decades ago, when Lucas was a boy playing in the yard and Thomas was humming while fixing the fence. I could almost believe none of this had happened, but the truth lingered in every shadow. I wasn't part of Lucas's plans. I was just in his way. I took out a notebook from the drawer and wrote on the first page, "They don't see me anymore." The words looked small, fragile, but they were mine. I kept writing, line after line, recording every conversation, every subtle insult, every time Mia said when it's ours instead of if it's ours. It wasn't about revenge, it was about proof, to myself, that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't crazy. By the time I put the pen down, 5 pages were full. And in those pages, something shifted. The grief was still there, but beneath it was a pulse, steady, cold, alive. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without leaving the hallway light on. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that pretends to be harmless. I had taken the throw rugs outside to shake the dust and laid them over the porch railing to breathe. The air smelled like cut grass and someone's distant barbecue. When I came back in, I set a pot of chicken soup on low and went upstairs to sort linens, old pillowcases, a sheet with a small tear, a quilt Thomas's mother stitched the year Lucas was born. I pressed that quilt to my face and, for a second, I let myself be a younger woman in a house that still felt like a promise. Then I heard the front door open. No knock, no call of my name, just footsteps. Light, quick, familiar. I paused at the landing. Lucas's voice drifted up first. She left it unlocked again. Mia answered in a whisper that wasn't really a whisper, more like a stage aside meant to sound concerned. It's not safe. Another reason we need to move her out. I stayed still, a shadow at the top of the stairs, listening. Keys clinked onto the entry table. Paper rustled. Okay, Mia said. Walk me through the numbers again. Lucas took a breath like a man beginning a sales pitch. If she sells at market, even low end, we're talking 400 to 420. If we renovate after we take over, that goes up. But the fastest path is a transfer, then a refinance in our names. Lower rates, lower taxes, we roll the equity into a new build. And she'll agree to that? Mia asked. Of course not, he said without missing a beat. But she doesn't have to. There was a smile in his voice I didn't recognize. Once the deed's secured, it's done. My hand tightened on the banister until my knuckles ached. I thought of the documents he'd shoved across my table, the way he'd called them financial stuff, the way I had pushed them back. I thought of the crack that had split the photo of Thomas and our boy, a scar across two faces I loved. And if she doesn't sign? Mia said. Lucas made a dismissive sound. We wait. The house will be mine eventually. We just accelerate the process, get a doctor to recommend assisted living, have an attorney draft a durable power of attorney for me as next of kin. She hates conflict. She'll fold. The blood rose in my ears so sharply the house seemed to tilt. Assisted living, power of attorney, words dressed as concern, sharpened into weapons. I could picture the scene they wanted. Me in a smaller, quieter room that did not smell like lemon oil and old books. Me with a window that did not look out on the oak Thomas planted. Me not recognizing the life I had spent decades making mine. Look, Lucas went on, lower, impatient. I'm tired of tiptoeing. I work 60 hours a week, our rent is insane, and this place is just sitting here. Empty rooms and creaking stairs and her acting like it's a museum we're not allowed to touch. It's not fair. Fair to who? Mia said, and the softness left her voice completely. We need to think about our family. We could have a baby next year if we weren't throwing money at rent. A pause. Then Mia again, more matter of fact. So we do what we have to do. She'll adjust. Old people do. I looked down at my hands. They were not the hands of an old person in the way they meant. They were lined, yes, but steady. Capable, not done. I started down the stairs because I didn't trust my legs to move any other way. At the bottom, I stopped in the doorway to the living room. They were at my dining table with a laptop open and a stack of glossy brochures, kitchen remodels, nursery decor, tile patterns. Lucas had a tape measure on the table, the one Thomas used to keep in the garage. Mia was pointing at a page that showed a bright white kitchen that didn't look like it had ever seen soup. Oh, she said, without guilt, without even the grace to look surprised. Hey, Helen. Mum, Lucas said, standing slowly like he'd been caught in something but wasn't quite willing to admit it. His eyes went to the staircase behind me, then to my face. You shouldn't leave the door unlocked. I thought I was safe in my own home, I said. My voice sounded flat, like it belonged to someone else. He tried to recover. We were just planning, I said, nodding at the tape measure. The brochures, the way he held his shoulders like a man who believes the room belongs to him. For a nursery, Mia offered, as if the word itself were a blessing that would sanctify everything. We want to build a family here. Isn't that what you always said? This house should be full of life. Life isn't the same as ownership, I said. Lucas let out a breath through his nose. You're making this adversarial for no reason. We're trying to help you. He gestured broadly. Stairs are dangerous. The roof needs work. The plumbing is ancient. You can't keep up. It's time. Time for who? I asked, the question slow and careful. He stared at me a beat too long. For everyone, he said finally, which told me everything. I walked to the table and touched the edge of the brochure, then set it down like I was tucking a child back into a bed that didn't belong to them anymore. I heard you, I said softly. Upstairs. Colour drained from Mia's face, but she steadied herself quickly. You misunderstood. I didn't, I said, and I won't pretend to. Lucas's jaw flexed. Mom, let's not dramatize. You always do this. Always. As if I'd been unreasonable my whole life and not just in this moment when I dared to draw a line. Something in me made a small, decisive click. It sounded like a lock turning from the inside. I turned off the soup, plated 3 bowls, set them at the table. Eat, I said, then leave. We're not children, he snapped. No, I said, meeting his eyes. You're not. We ate in a silence that had weight. I could feel every year of my marriage and motherhood sitting in those 3 bowls. How many times I had ladled comfort when I was the one who needed it. How many times I had swallowed words I should have said aloud. Lucas finished first, pushed his chair back, wiped his mouth like a man at a business lunch. We'll be back Friday, he said. Bring the deed. We'll go over options with a broker. No, I answered. He smiled as if he thought no meant convince me. Mom, no, I said again. Don't come Friday. Don't bring a broker. Don't bring more papers for me to sign. You can't stop us from helping you, Mia said, her voice rising. Watch me, I replied. She rolled her eyes, gathered the brochures with jerky motions, stuffed them into her tote. Lucas stood, tape measure in his fist like a small, stupid weapon. At the door, he paused. You're being selfish, he said. You're asking us to keep waiting while you rattle around in this place like a ghost. For what? Memories? I didn't look away. Yes, I said. For memories, for dignity, for the right to decide. He swallowed something and left without another word. When the door shut, I locked it and leaned my forehead against the wood for a long time, letting the cool of the varnish calm the heat in my face. The house hummed around me, the fridge, the old pipes, the faint rattle of a vent I'd been meaning to fix since winter. I felt a tremor begin in my chest and move outward until I had to sit, hands on the table, breathing like I'd just climbed a hill. I thought I might cry, but the tears didn't come. Anger did, not the kind that explodes and burns everything in its path, a different kind, cold, meticulous, measured, the kind that sharpens you into a tool. I washed the bowls, I wiped the table, I put the tape measure back in the drawer where Thomas used to keep his things. Then I went to the hall closet and pulled down a small black box I hadn't touched since the funeral. Inside were our marriage certificate, insurance policies, the deed to the house, a letter from our first bank. I laid them out on the table like a patient lining up instruments, past, present, proof. After that, I took out my phone. I opened a new note and titled it House. Beneath it, I wrote the date, the time, and everything I had heard. The exact phrases, the order they said them in. I wrote until the room felt steady again. I scrolled to settings and turned on the feature that saves voice memos automatically to the cloud. I tested the recorder. My voice sounded older than I felt, but it was clear. Lucas called that night, as if the script demanded one more scene. You thought about Friday? He asked, like a man confirming a delivery window. No, I said, and don't come. A pause. You don't get to tell me. I do, I said, and hung up. Sleep came late, crowded with noises, doors opening, papers sliding, a tape measure snapping back into its case. When morning finally arrived, I wasn't rested, but I was certain. Certainty can be stronger than sleep. I made coffee, combed my hair, put on the navy sweater Thomas always said made my eyes look kind. Then I did something I should have done months ago. I went to the county website and read the fine print. I read about ownership, transfer, power of attorney, elder abuse statutes, revocable trusts, beneficiary deeds. I wrote down phone numbers, I made appointments. I learnt the words they wanted to use against me and turned them into a language I could speak first. At noon, I walked to the bank with our old folder tucked under my arm and sat with a woman named Jenna who had a braid and a patient smile. I told her I needed to open a separate account, change my mailing address to a PO box, and set up two-factor authentication on everything. "Travel plans?" she asked conversationally. "Something like that," I said. When I left, I felt taller, lighter, like I'd stepped out from under a shadow I hadn't known was there. On the way home, I passed a real estate office I'd always ignored. The windows were full of photos, smiling couples, sunlit kitchens, backyard swings. A sign read, "We protect sellers." I stood there long enough that a young agent opened the door and asked if I needed help. "Maybe," I said, "but not yet." I went back to the house that was still mine and made a list on the back of an envelope. Call attorney, price roof, gather receipts, scan documents, pack what matters. Underline, don't tell Lucas. I circled that part twice. That evening, the light fell across the living room in a way that made every dust mote look like a star. I picked up the quilt again, the one stitched with small blue squares that had faded at the edges where small hands used to tug. I thought of the boy who slept under it and the man who believed he was owed a house because of it. I folded the quilt carefully and put it in the suitcase I had pulled from the attic. Not to run, to move on my terms. When the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. Lucas's voice was tight. "Mom, pick up. We found the perfect broker. He can come tomorrow. Don't make this ugly." When the message ended, I sat very still. The house made one of its old, familiar groans, as if it were settling its bones before a long rest. "I know," I said aloud to no one and to everything. "Me too." Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number from my list. When the receptionist answered, I said the words clearly, the way you say your name at a counter when you're ready to be called forward. "I'd like to discuss selling my home," I said, quietly. The morning after that phone call, I woke up before sunrise. I didn't know if it was the sound of the garbage truck, the weight of my decision, or simply the habit of a woman who's lived too long waiting for something to change. But that day felt different, sharper, quieter, alive with the kind of silence that comes before a storm you choose to walk into. I made coffee but didn't drink it. I just held the cup, feeling the warmth against my palms, like I was holding courage itself. The phone sat on the counter beside it, the realtor's number glowing on the screen from the night before. I hadn't saved it yet. I wanted to make sure I still meant it. At 8:02 a.m., I called back. "Good morning," a woman's voice said. "This is Claire from Haven Realty." I hesitated. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Good morning," I managed. "I'd like to sell my house." She asked for the address, the condition, the number of bedrooms. I answered every question with the same calm, steady tone I used to use when Lucas scraped his knee as a child. I was soothing myself now. "Would you like to list it publicly or privately?" she asked. "Privately," I said. "No signs, no open houses. Discretion matters." "Understood," she said, as if women like me called her every day, women who wanted to vanish quietly with their dignity intact. We scheduled an appraisal for Thursday. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at the coffee gone cold, realizing I'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That afternoon I started cleaning, not to make the house pretty for buyers, but to strip it of ghosts. I took down the wedding photo of Thomas and me. The frame was cracked at the corner, dust settled along the edge. I traced his face with my finger and whispered, "You'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you?" Silence. But somehow I knew the answer. I boxed up Lucas's old baseball trophies, the kindergarten handprints in plaster, the photos of him in braces and awkward middle school poses. Each one felt like a splinter, small, painful, impossible to remove without bleeding. I packed them anyway. At some point, I found the old notebook I'd started, the one where I wrote, "They don't see me anymore." I opened to the last page and added a new line. But I see myself now. That sentence looked stronger than I felt. Still, it was enough. The next day, I walked down to the bank again. I met with Jenna, the young woman with the braid, and told her I needed to move my savings into a new account under a trust. She looked at me carefully. "Do you want to add a family member as a beneficiary?" "No," I said. "Not yet." She nodded slowly, the kind of nod that says, "I understand what you're not saying." As I left, she gave me her card. "If anyone calls pretending to be you," she said, "we'll know. We'll call you first." For the first time in months, I felt protected, not by family, but by my own decision-making. On Thursday morning, a tall man in a grey suit arrived right on time. His name was Ethan. He smiled politely, the kind of professional smile people wear when they know your story before you tell it. "Mrs. Owens," he said, "I'll make this quick." He walked through the house with his clipboard, murmuring numbers, nodding to himself. "Structurally solid," he said. "A little dated but charming. I could get you a cash buyer fast if that's what you're after." "That's exactly what I'm after." He hesitated, lowering his pen. "If I may ask, does your family know?" I met his eyes and held them. "No, and they won't until it's done." He didn't ask again. He just nodded once, wrote something down, and said, "Then we'll keep it quiet." When he left, I stood in the entryway staring at the sunlight pouring through the stained glass window, splashing little pieces of colour onto the floor. For a moment, I saw a reflection of myself in those colours, fractured, but still whole. That evening, Lucas called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail instead. His tone was colder now. "Mom, I'm serious. We've talked about this long enough. Friday at 6. I'll bring the papers again. You're signing this time." I replayed that message twice, each time noticing the shift in his voice, the lack of affection, the presence of ownership. When the realtor texted me later that night, "Offer received, 410K, cash, buyer ready to close within 2 weeks." I stared at the message for a long while, then I typed back, "Accept." My hands were shaking as I hit send. But I didn't delete the message. I wanted proof that I had done it. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I cooked breakfast for one, eggs and toast, humming to myself. The kitchen looked softer somehow, almost grateful. Maybe the house knew it was finally being set free too. By afternoon, I'd signed the preliminary documents. It was official now. The title transfer would be completed by next Friday. That same evening, Lucas showed up, without warning, of course. The doorbell rang 3 times in a row, impatient. I opened it halfway. "Mom, what the hell?" he said immediately. "You've been ignoring my calls. What's going on?" "Nothing's going on," I said, stepping back but not enough for him to come in. "I've just been busy." He narrowed his eyes. "Busy with what?" "Living," I said. He frowned, confused by the simplicity of it. "Well, you'd better not have done anything stupid. That realtor you met with—" I cut him off. "Lucas, how would you even know that?" His silence told me everything. He'd been checking up on me, probably called the neighbour, maybe even drove by. "Mom," he said finally, lowering his tone, "you can't trust those people. They'll take advantage of you. Let me handle it." "I already did," I said softly. "I handled it." For a split second, he didn't understand. Then his face changed. The colour drained, the lips tightened. "You didn't," he said. "I did." "You sold it?" "Yes." "To who?" "Someone who doesn't call their mother an inconvenience." He stood there, frozen, his jaw working but no sound coming out. Mia's voice echoed faintly from the car outside. "What's taking so long?" He didn't answer her. He just stared at me like I'd set fire to something sacred. "Why, Mom?" he finally whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because I remembered," I said, "that your father built this house for us to live in, not for you to inherit." He shook his head, stepped back like I'd slapped him. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least the regret will be mine. He turned and walked away. I closed the door gently, locked it, and leaned against it until I could breathe again. The next morning, I stood by the window watching the realtor's car pull up. He came with a folder of closing papers and a small envelope. Inside was the deposit check. It felt heavier than it should have, like a symbol instead of money. I thanked him, signed the final page, and handed him the keys. When the door closed behind him, the silence that filled the house wasn't empty, it was clean. That night, I slept through till morning for the first time in years. No nightmares, no pacing, no phone calls, just rest. When I woke, I realized something profound. I hadn't just sold a house, I'd reclaimed a life. The day Lucas found out, the sky was as calm as my voice. There was no thunder, no cinematic storm, just the soft light of late afternoon streaming through the windows of a house that was no longer mine. The sale had closed 2 days earlier. The money was in my account, the deed transferred, the keys delivered. I had already moved into my new place, a quiet one-bedroom on the other side of town, near a small lake and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon every morning. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, entirely mine. When Lucas called that morning, his tone was brisk, confident, the kind of tone a man uses when he thinks he's about to win. "Mom, we're coming by after work," he said. "We'll talk about the sale plan, finalize everything. Mia found a good broker who'll get us top dollar." I didn't tell him that the sale was already complete. I simply said, "All right, I'll be here." At 5:30, his car pulled into the driveway of the old house. I had gone there early, one last time, to gather the few things I'd left behind. A vase, some old photographs, the last of Thomas's tools. When I heard the door slam and his hurried steps echo through the hallway, my heart didn't race. It was steady, cold. "Mom?" His voice boomed through the emptiness. "Mom, where are you?" "In here," I said. He turned the corner and stopped dead. The living room was stripped bare, no curtains, no couch. Just a few boxes stacked near the wall and sunlight spilling across the floor where the rug used to be. His face shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, then anger. "What the hell happened here?" "I sold it," I said quietly. He blinked, like he hadn't heard me right. "You what?" "I sold the house." There was a silence so thick it felt like time had paused between us. Then his voice erupted. "You can't do that. I told you to wait. We had plans, Mom. He stopped himself, his words colliding with reality. There was no we, not anymore. "I had plans too," I said, "to live my life without waiting for permission." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You sold it? Without talking to me? Without even telling me?" "Yes," I said, by exactly the way you've made every decision about my life for the last 5 years, without asking. Mia's heels clicked down the hallway behind him. When she entered the room and saw the emptiness, her face drained of colour. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You actually did it." "Yes," I said again. But where's the money?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You must have gotten a lot. Where is it?" I looked straight at her. "Safe." Lucas stepped closer. "Mom, you can't just..." I held up my hand. "Don't finish that sentence, Lucas. Don't tell me what I can't do. You've been doing that since your father died. You told me not to travel, not to drive at night, not to spend too much. Every don't was just another chain you wrapped around me while you waited for me to fade away." "That's not true," he snapped. "I was trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to inherit." The words landed like a slap. He froze, his eyes narrowing. "That's not fair." "Neither is planning a nursery in a house that isn't yours," I said. And for the first time, I saw it. The flicker of guilt, quick and sharp, before it disappeared beneath pride. Mia crossed her arms. "This isn't right, Helen. We deserve to know where that money went. We're your family." "You're adults," I said. "You deserve to build your own home, not take mine." Lucas's voice dropped, low and dangerous. You're being selfish. You always were. Dad's gone and you can't stand that we're moving forward. Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't pain, it was release. Your father would be ashamed of how you speak to me. Don't bring him into this, Lucas barked. I didn't, I said, stepping closer. You did. Every time you used his name to guilt me into silence. The air between us thickened. I could see his jaw tighten, his fists clench, the tremor in his hands he got when he felt cornered. I had seen that tremor when he was a child, when he broke something and didn't want to admit it. But this time, I didn't comfort him. I didn't reach out. Give me the money, Mom, he said suddenly, his tone shifting from pleading to commanding. We can still buy the new house. You'll have your place with us. We'll make it right. No, I said, his voice cracked. You can't just take everything we worked for. We? I repeated, almost laughing. Lucas, you didn't pay for this house. You didn't build it. You didn't even visit unless you needed something. You didn't work for it. You waited for it. There's a difference. Mia grabbed his arm. Lucas, stop. But he wasn't listening. He stepped closer, his face red, his voice shaking. You're making a mistake, Mom. You think this gives you control? It doesn't. You're just old and scared and bitter, and one day you'll regret this when you're alone. I looked him in the eye. I've been alone for a long time. The difference now is, it's by choice. For a second, his anger faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the empty room as if trying to find an anchor, something familiar to hold on to. There was nothing left. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice hoarse. It is, I said softly. It was over the moment you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a wallet. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned sharply toward the door. Mia hesitated, her eyes flicking between us. I hope you're happy, she said bitterly. I am, I said, for the first time in years. When the door slammed, the echo rolled through the empty house like thunder after all. But it didn't frighten me. It sounded like applause. I sat down on the bare floor, breathing in the silence. My hands were steady, my pulse was calm. I took out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I had recorded everything, their words, their demands, every conversation that had turned love into leverage. I played back the first few seconds of the most recent recording. Give me the money, Mom. You can't just take everything we worked for. I saved the file, labeled it insurance, and uploaded it to the cloud, just in case. Then I looked around the empty house and smiled. The walls had heard every argument, every apology, every lie. Now they'd heard the truth. Before leaving, I walked to the window. The sky outside was streaked with orange, the same shade as the sunsets Thomas used to love. I whispered to him, "It's done." I locked the door for the last time, slid the key into my pocket, and walked down the front steps. The wind lifted my hair, cool and soft. For the first time, I didn't look back. At my new condo, I unpacked slowly, just the essentials, some books, a few photographs, my favorite quilt. I placed the framed picture of Thomas on the nightstand. His eyes were kind, his smile small, as if he already knew the ending of this story before I did. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the reflection of city lights on the lake. My phone buzzed once, then again, messages from Lucas, alternating between anger and apology. I didn't read them, I deleted them all. I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the table, and took a long breath. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and whispered into the dark. I sold the house, Thomas, but what I really sold was the cage. Then I smiled, a small, quiet smile, the kind that comes when you finally understand freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sighs. The next few days passed like the quiet after a storm, deceptively peaceful, but carrying the scent of something scorched beneath the air. My phone became the battlefield. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that swung wildly between fury and guilt. You betrayed us. You've lost your mind. We just wanted to help you. Please, Mum, can we talk? I didn't answer a single one. Each notification was another ghost, banging on a door I had already locked from the inside. Still, even freedom has its echo. The silence in my new apartment was heavy in the evenings. No creak of the old stairs, no tick of the grandfather clock, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of someone else's TV through the wall. I should have felt lonely. Maybe I did. But underneath the loneliness was something sturdier, relief. The world hadn't ended because my son was angry. The world had simply changed. One afternoon, I walked to the small park near the lake. Ducks floated lazily in the water, sunlight flashing off their feathers. I sat on a bench with a paper cup of coffee and watched them for a long time. A woman around my age sat down beside me, feeding crumbs to the birds. "Beautiful day," she said. "It is," I answered. We exchanged the polite smiles of strangers who might see each other again but never planned to. She wore a wedding ring that caught the sun. "Do you live around here?" "I just moved," I said. "Downsizing?" I laughed softly. "Something like that." She smiled, not pressing further, and I was grateful. I didn't want to explain that I hadn't downsized. I had escaped. When I returned home, a new voicemail was waiting. It wasn't Lucas this time. It was Mia. Her voice cracked halfway through her message. "Helen, I know you're angry. I know we pushed too hard, but Lucas is falling apart. He won't eat. He barely sleeps. Please, can you just talk to him? You're his mother. He needs you." I replayed it once, then again. I waited for the guilt to come. It didn't. All I felt was a dull ache, like pressing on a scar that had already healed. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing in the notebook again. They say motherhood is forever, but so is self-respect. The next morning, I went to the market for groceries. The cashier, a cheerful young man with freckles, smiled and said, "How's your day going, ma'am?" "Peaceful," I said. He nodded as if it were a normal answer. Maybe it was, for people who didn't have to fight for peace. When I got back, there was an envelope under my door. No return address, just my name scrawled in my son's handwriting. For a moment, my stomach turned cold. I sat on the couch, holding it like a fragile relic. Then I opened it. Inside were 3 things. 1, a single sheet of paper with the words, "You'll regret this." 2, a copy of a lawyer's business card. 3, a folded photo, Lucas at 8 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up the first fish he ever caught. I stared at that photo for a long time. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The little boy's smile was still pure, untouched by greed, unbroken by disappointment. I traced his face with my thumb and whispered, "Where did you go?" Then I burned the note in an ashtray. The smoke curled like a question I no longer needed to answer. 2 days later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I picked up, a calm male voice said, "Mrs. Owens, this is Detective Harris from the Financial Crimes Division. I just wanted to confirm you recently sold your property." My throat tightened. "Yes, why?" "There's been an inquiry regarding the sale. Someone claimed you might have been coerced. We're required to check for elder fraud." I closed my eyes. "And who made that claim?" "I can't disclose that, ma'am," he said gently, though his tone already gave it away. "Let me guess," I said. "A son who doesn't understand the word no?" The detective chuckled softly, then his voice turned respectful. "We looked through the paperwork. It's all legitimate. You handled this perfectly. Just wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm better than all right," I said. "Good to hear, ma'am. If anyone contacts you again in a threatening manner, please let us know." I thanked him and hung up. Then I laughed. A short, incredulous laugh that felt almost like joy. Lucas had actually tried to weaponize the law against me, and it had backfired. He'd wanted to declare me incompetent. Instead, the police confirmed the opposite. That night, I poured myself a small glass of red wine, the first drink I'd had since Thomas's funeral, and raised it to the empty room. To being sane, I said aloud, and finally acting like it. Over the next week, the calls stopped. I suspected the detective's visit to Lucas's office had something to do with it, or maybe he finally realised that manipulation no longer worked on me. Either way, the silence returned, clean, unthreatening. I spent my days unpacking, rearranging, learning the new rhythm of my life. Morning walks by the lake, afternoon tea with a neighbour named Ruth, who lived 2 doors down and liked to talk about her cat. I even joined a community art class, something I'd always thought about but never done. The first day, the instructor handed me a blank canvas and said, "Paint how you feel today." I stared at the white space for a long time, brush in hand. Then I painted a single open door, sunlight spilling through it. No figures, no faces, just freedom. When I brought the painting home, I hung it on the wall across from my bed. Every morning it greeted me. Every night it reminded me why I'd done what I did. But healing isn't linear. One evening, around dusk, there was another knock at the door. For a second I froze. I almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. It was a delivery man. He held a small box with no return label. "Package for Helen Owens." I thanked him and signed. Inside the box was a single silver key, the spare key to the old house. No note, no explanation, just the key. I stared at it until the light outside turned from gold to grey. Maybe Lucas sent it as a cruel reminder. Maybe it was his way of saying goodbye. Either way, I placed it in a drawer, closed it, and whispered, "That door stays locked." The next morning, I woke early and made coffee. The air smelled sweet, like rain was coming. I sat by the window, listening to the world waking up. The distant hum of traffic, the rustle of trees, the laughter of children on their way to school. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. In my notebook, I wrote one final line for the chapter I'd been chronicling. He tried to bury me in guilt. I grew roots instead. And then I closed it. That night, before bed, I said my evening prayer, the same one I used to say with Thomas. But this time I didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not strength, not hope. I simply said thank you. Because peace, after all, is not something you find. It's something you finally stop giving away. The first thing I noticed about my new life was the quiet rhythm of mornings, the kind that didn't feel like waiting. The sun crept through the curtains at just the right angle, warming my small kitchen. The floor creaked under my slippers, not with age but with familiarity. My coffee maker gurgled its slow song, and I caught myself humming along. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the day ahead. I started walking by the lake every morning. It wasn't a fancy place, a man-made pond with benches and ducks that never seemed hungry, but it was mine. The air was always crisp, the reflection on the water soft and forgiving. Sometimes I'd bring my notebook and write small things, memories, half-thoughts, lines I didn't know I needed to say out loud. Peace is not a prize, it's a muscle. You have to use it every day. The pages filled faster than I expected. On one of those mornings, I saw Ruth again, the neighbour with the cat and the kind laugh. She was sitting on a bench, struggling with a canvas bag that seemed heavier than she was. I walked over. "Need a hand?" She smiled, a little embarrassed. "Oh, this thing has a mind of its own. I keep telling myself I don't need all these groceries, but then I see the sale tags and forget." I laughed and took one of the bags. I know that feeling. That small act turned into a friendship. We started walking together after breakfast, sharing stories about recipes, bad knees, and families that didn't visit enough. There was no pity between us, just recognition. She was the first person in years who talked to me, not at me. One morning, she asked if I liked painting. "I haven't held a brush since grade school," I said. "Well," she replied, "then you'll fit right in." She dragged me, gently, stubbornly, to a local community centre 2 blocks away. It was a small white building with peeling paint, filled with laughter, the smell of turpentine, and the sound of women my age talking about everything except their aches. The instructor, Ms. Vance, had white hair piled into a bun and eyes that looked like they'd seen entire lives and still believed in second chances. "Welcome," she said when I walked in. "Don't worry about making art. We're here to make peace." I didn't understand what she meant until I dipped the brush into colour. My hands trembled at first, too careful, too restrained. But as the minutes passed, something loosened. In my fingers, in my chest, in my memories. I didn't paint a landscape or a flower or a face. I painted streaks of gold and grey and blue, the colours of every year I'd spent holding my breath. When class ended, Ms. Vance looked over my shoulder. "You paint like someone remembering how to breathe." I smiled, startled. Maybe that's what I'm doing. From then on, I painted twice a week. Ruth came too, though she was far more social. She'd crack jokes about her messy brushwork and tease me for being too serious. We'd go for coffee after class, sit by the lake, and watch the light change on the water. Every time she'd say the same thing. "This is our reward, Helen, still being here." I started noticing how much lighter I felt. Not young exactly, but unburdened. I'd wake up and stretch without dread. I'd plan dinner not as an obligation, but as a small celebration. The walls of my condo were still plain, but I began filling them, one by one, with my own paintings. The first one I hung above the couch, an open door, sunlight spilling through it. Underneath, I wrote a small note in pencil. I chose this. One Saturday, Ruth and I went to a flea market. It was crowded and loud, vendors shouting about old furniture and handmade scarves. I found an old wooden frame with a faint engraving at the bottom. "Home is a decision." The words hit me hard. I bought it for $5, brought it home, and placed my favourite painting inside, the one that looked like a sunrise after a long night. Weeks passed like pages turning. The apartment began to feel like an extension of me. I planted herbs on the windowsill, basil, mint, and rosemary, their scents filling the kitchen when the breeze came through. I adopted a stray cat that had been lingering near the dumpsters behind the bakery. I named her Clover because she walked with a slight limp but never stopped exploring. At night, I'd sit on the balcony with Clover curled at my feet and the sound of cicadas humming below. Sometimes I'd wonder what Lucas was doing, whether he'd learnt to cook, whether Mia had left, whether he'd finally grown up. But the wondering was gentle, not heavy. I didn't ache for answers anymore. One afternoon, Ruth came running up to my door, flushed and excited. "Guess what?" she said, barely catching her breath. "Ms. Vance is organising a small exhibition at the community hall. She wants us to submit our work." I froze. "Exhibition? Oh no, I'm not ready for that." Ruth laughed. "You think any of us are?" She said it's not about being good. It's about being seen. That sentence stayed with me long after she left. Being seen. For so long, I'd begged my son to see me. Now I was being asked to see myself. A week later, I submitted 3 paintings: the door, the lake at dusk, and the quilt. The last one was the hardest, a soft mix of blue and grey, with faint lines crossing each other like the stitches of a memory. The night of the exhibition, I stood among strangers who didn't know my story but understood the language of colour and survival. When people stopped to look at my work, I didn't feel small, I didn't feel invisible, I felt present, whole. Ruth nudged me with her elbow. "You see," she whispered, "still being here, that's the victory." We clinked plastic cups of cheap wine and laughed like girls. After the event, I walked home under the streetlights. My steps were slow, deliberate, unhurried. The air smelled of rain and paint and the faint sweetness of something blooming nearby. I thought about Thomas, how he used to say, "The best gardens grow in cracked soil." He was right. My heart had cracked, but something beautiful had grown there anyway. When I got home, I lit a small candle, opened my notebook and wrote, "Happiness doesn't always return as people. Sometimes it comes back as quiet." Then I turned off the lights, pulled the quilt over me, and let the darkness wrap around me like peace itself. Outside, the night was full of wind and crickets, but inside, everything was still. I had no husband, no son, no promises left to keep. And yet, for the first time, I felt completely alive. Because the truth is, freedom isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in trumpets or applause. It comes softly, like the morning light seeping through a curtain you forgot to close, whispering, "You made it." It had been 3 months since the confrontation, 3 months since I walked out of the old house for the last time and closed that heavy door behind me. I had thought the sound of it would haunt me, but it didn't. It became an echo of closure, a punctuation mark at the end of a long sentence I had been afraid to finish. Life had found a calm rhythm. Morning walks, painting classes, tea with Ruth on her balcony where the sun always hit just right. The kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, it simply starts to feel normal. I hadn't heard from Lucas in weeks. His silence was both gift and ache. One Saturday morning, as I was watering the herbs on my windowsill, my phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Owens?" The voice was careful, unsure. "This is Lucas." For a second, I couldn't speak. I hadn't heard my son's voice in nearly 2 months, and time had roughened it. He sounded older, heavier. I just wanted to say. He hesitated, breathing into the phone. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words didn't come out smooth. They cracked, like something that had been waiting too long to break. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he continued. "You were right about everything. About the house, about me, about everything. I messed up, Mom. I lost more than a house. I lost you." I sat down slowly, my knees trembling. "Lucas," I said quietly, "what happened?" He exhaled shakily. "Mia and I separated. She wanted the money. I wanted control. Turns out neither of us wanted each other. I've been staying with a friend, trying to fix things, trying to fix myself. I even started therapy. He paused, searching for the right words. "I just want you to know I understand now. You didn't sell the house to hurt me. You sold it to survive me." I closed my eyes. There were tears, but not of pain, just the soft kind that come from recognition. "I never wanted to hurt you, Lucas," I said. "I only wanted to be seen." "I see you now," he whispered. "I just wish I hadn't waited so long." We stayed on the phone in silence for nearly a minute, the kind that says more than words ever could. Finally, he asked, "Can I come see you?" I hesitated. My first instinct was to protect my peace, but something in his voice was different, not demanding, not entitled, just human. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow." The next day, I baked a small lemon cake, the kind he loved as a child. The smell filled the apartment with a warmth that almost hurt. At 3 p.m, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, the man standing there wasn't the son who'd yelled at me months ago. He looked smaller somehow, humbled. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shirt wrinkled, his hands trembling. "Hi, Mum," he said softly. "Hi, Lucas." He stepped inside carefully, as though the floor might reject him. His gaze landed on the paintings hanging on my walls. "You've been busy," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I have," I replied. "It's been good for me." He nodded. "They're beautiful. The colours feel peaceful." Peace was the point. We sat at the kitchen table, the same way we used to before everything turned sharp. I poured tea, sliced the cake, and waited. He cleared his throat. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to tell you that I understand now. I was raised by a woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. I thought that was love. I thought love meant ownership. I'm sorry I learnt that lesson too late." "Maybe not too late," I said. "You're here." He nodded, blinking back tears. "I missed you." I smiled gently. "Then let's start from there." We talked for hours, not about the past, but about small things. His job, my art class, the way the cat liked to sleep in the laundry basket. When he left that evening, he hugged me. It wasn't the stiff, obligatory hug I'd grown used to. It was warm, trembling, real. A week later, my community centre hosted the art exhibition. Ms. Vance had hung our paintings along the walls, small stories told in colour. Mine hung side by side, the door, the quilt, the lake at dusk. Ruth brought flowers, laughing that she'd stolen them from her neighbour's garden. Halfway through the evening, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" Lucas stood at the doorway, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said, "but I wanted to see what you've made." I smiled, stunned but grateful. "You came." "I told you," he said, looking around at the paintings. "I see you now." He walked up to the door, the first painting I'd ever finished, and stared at it for a long time. "This one," he said finally. "It looks like freedom." "It is," I said. Then he turned to me. "Can I take a picture? I want to remember this." I nodded. He took out his phone, snapped a photo, and then asked quietly, "Would you stand next to it?" I did. The flash went off. For once, I didn't flinch. When the event ended, he helped me carry my canvases back home. Outside the building, he stopped and looked up at the night sky. "Dad would have been proud of you," he said. I swallowed hard. "I think he'd be proud of you too, for coming back." He smiled, shy, almost boyish. "I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying." "I know," I said, "and that's enough." When he left that night, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the taillights fade into the dark. The city was quiet. The moon hung low and kind. I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for finding your way back." Weeks passed, and our calls became regular. Not every day, not forced, just natural. Sometimes he'd tell me about his therapy sessions, sometimes about the meals he was learning to cook. And every time he ended the call with, "I love you, Mum." It wasn't something he'd said in years. One morning I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside, a single note. "Dear Mrs. Owens, I bought your old house. I just wanted you to know it's still filled with light. We're not changing a thing. The oak tree in the back, it's blooming again." I smiled, folded the letter carefully, and slipped it into my notebook. Some things don't die, they just move homes. That evening, Ruth and I watched the sunset from the bench by the lake. The air was cool, the sky turning every shade of gold and pink. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but not like before. The past used to own me, now it just visits." Ruth chuckled. "You sound like a poet." "Maybe I'm just someone who finally stopped apologizing for surviving." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's better than poetry." When I got home, I opened my notebook one last time. The first page still read, "They don't see me anymore." Beneath it, I added the final line of my story. "They see me now because I finally see myself." I closed it, blew out the candle, and sat in the dark. Not the lonely kind of dark, the peaceful kind. The kind that wraps around you when you know, deep down, you did what you had to do. Outside, a light breeze rustled through the trees. Clover jumped onto the window ledge, her green eyes glowing in the dim light. I scratched behind her ear and whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" She purred and the sound filled the room, soft, steady, alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the word family. It no longer meant obligation or guilt. It meant something simple, something earned, love freely given. And as the moon rose higher, painting silver across the lake outside, I realized this story wasn't about loss at all. It was about arrival. Because redemption doesn't always come as forgiveness from others. Sometimes it comes as forgiveness for yourself. And that is how I learned that sometimes love has to let go before it can come back whole. If this story touched you, take a deep breath and hold on to the people who truly see you. not for what you can give, but for who you are. Leave me a comment below and tell me what part spoke to your heart. And if you believe that strength can still live inside gentleness, share this story with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Thank you for listening all the way through. May peace find its way to you, and stay.